Hello, and welcome to Entangled, the podcast where we explore the science of consciousness, the true nature of reality, and what it means to be a spiritual being having a human experience. Today, I'm joined by Reverend Jay Waxenberg, an interfaith minister and spiritual counselor at Boulder's Center for Medicinal Mindfulness. In this episode, Jay talks about how his interest in understanding reality as a boy led to his study of consciousness, his exploration of psychedelics, and his introduction to spirituality. We then talk about Ram Dass and the lessons Jay learned from Dass on his own journey. Next, we discuss best practices for psychedelic harm reduction and how psychedelics can be integrated with other spiritual practices. From there, we talk about the difficulties associated with conducting research on psychedelics due to their Schedule I substance designation, and how that has impacted Jay's work in the DMTx research project. We end the discussion talking about medicinal mindfulness and the help they're providing for spiritual explorers looking to safely work with psychedelics. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Entangled. I'm your host, Jordan Euclid, and tonight I'm here with my friend, Reverend Jay Waxenberg. Jay, how are you doing tonight?
Pretty good, man. Pretty good.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us. I think a lot of exciting stuff that we can talk about tonight. Jay and I met through Medicinal Mindfulness, which is a really, really awesome clinic here in Colorado in Boulder. And so maybe to kick things off, Jay, maybe you could give the folks a little bit of your background and how you ended up at Medicinal Mindfulness.
Sure. An interfaith minister, and kind of all of this stuff started for me at the same time. So the spiritual stuff and the psychedelic stuff. And I was going to school for studying consciousness at the University of Miami, and happened to be like the most grounded in this reality person in the whole program. People were making fun of me, actually. I was so much rooted in like, and there's nothing else going on here. And why worry about all the spiritual stuff? And had a professor who kind of took me to the side and said, have you thought about psychedelics or anything in that space? And so I said, yeah. And that same week, a shaman had been staying at a friend of mine's place, and they invited me into the ceremony for ayahuasca. That was my first kind of raw experience of any of the psychedelic stuff or spiritual ceremonies for that matter. And it all kind of propelled me forward through my life. It essentially just took everything and made a hard turn towards spirituality, towards trying to understand consciousness and, psychedelics and all of that stuff like that. And a few years of traveling around and studying spirituality only, and then a few years of studying just psychedelics and training and how to hold space and psychology. And then found a wonderful place at Medicinal Mindfulness that kind of brought it all together and really gave me a space to be the full version of myself, which is the spiritual counselor and the psychedelic guide. And yeah, it's been a great journey.
Wow. And excited to learn a lot more about some of those key moments on your journey. And so to start with, I'd be curious to hear what drove you to major in consciousness before you'd had any psychedelic experiences.
Yeah. So I think I was always just kind of questioning reality. I just wanted to know what was going on. Like, how did we get here? What's up with all this? And so it started with undergrad. I was doing history. And towards the end of my undergrad, I switched into sociology and philosophy. Then I took a little bit of time off, and in the time off, I was just consuming as much like modern day, like quantum physics and philosophy, and just trying to understand, what's going on. And each time, like the questions just got bigger and bigger. And so eventually I was like, okay, I'll go back to school in the philosophy space and really try to understand the philosophy of consciousness, because the science it's not really fully there. And so I always feel like philosophy is a few steps ahead of science as far as like asking questions and trying to understand things. So that's kind of what pulled me into that space, was really just keep asking, like, what's going on here? And the questions just got bigger and bigger.
That's cool. And what was it that as a kid made you question reality?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that's a really great question. I'm not really sure what kind of triggered me down that path of just wanting to know what was going on. I think possibly it was related to the fact that so I have two moms, and growing up in the South, like it was just very weird. Like two moms in the South, and then plus I was Jewish, and so I had a last name that was Waxenberg, and so the combination meant like I was kind of different than everybody else, and so I wanted to know like, okay, well, why am I different? And that led me into like history questions about like how did we organize our society this way, and that then led me into the wider questions about the nature of being a human being.
Wow, that's really cool. And what's really remarkable about your story is that you had a professor who was willing to pull you aside and say, hey, this might be an experience that'd be beneficial to you, because I mean, even if they knew that to be profoundly true, just given those structure of society right now, I mean, they could have potentially, I'm sure, lost their job just even recommending that to you.
Yeah, gosh, I won't mention his name here, but sure. I'm so blessed for his presence. So like right before that ayahuasca ceremony, I told my mom, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do this thing and whatnot. And she just said to me like, okay, well, just don't drop out of school, whatever comes up in that experience. And of course, like I woke up the next day after that experience and was like, okay, I got to drop out of school. All I want to do is study this and know more about it. And so I emailed like 100 and something professors that I had taken through my undergrad and graduate classes, and basically said like, I want to study psychedelics in some way or another. And they all said no, except for one professor who was like, oh, come on in, let's talk about it. So I think I wrote up maybe 10 pages or something like this about why it's like, very important to study this. And I brought
it into this have been?
This was 2016.
Okay.
And I brought it into his office, and he like basically tossed out the paper and like looked me in the face and said, like, did you have a psychedelic experience? And I said, yes. And he was like, was it really meaningful? I said, yeah. And I kind of told him a bit about it. And he was like, okay, well, great. I'm the head of this department, and I'm also your dean. And so no one needs to read the papers but me. And so go as far as you want, do whatever you want to do, and I'll create that container for you to study it.
Wow. So tell me about what that first ayahuasca experience was like.
Yeah. It was definitely the, what like the psychonauts really seek it, right? This like ego death kind of unity experience, all as one. And I had been studying consciousness before this, and so was really vaguely familiar with people like Alan Watts and kind of some of their notions about, the nature of reality. And I remember at the peak of that experience, I could like hear Alan Watts' voice just kind of like giggling and being like, yeah, that it's all true. Like it's all of that stuff. And it was just, there was a moment before that was the death, kind of the ego death experience, which is it was really tough for me. I remember both shamans had to be like on either side of me, like going through a bunch of stuff to kind of hold me in place. And but right on the other side of that was this perfect unity. It's all one. I was connected with all of reality, and it really just propelled me out of the old way of thinking, because I was in this very materialistic, view of the universe, which just it shattered in that one moment.
Wow. Were you in the rainforest?
No, I was in South Florida. So these were traveling shamans, and
cool.
That 6 months afterwards, I got to go up and down the East Coast with them as they traveled.
And what was that experience like?
In retrospect, I would have handled it so different. But at the time, I was just starting to understand spirituality and just starting to understand all this stuff. And so I really treated it very academic. Like I was on the outside. I was always there, like writing some kind of paper, and didn't really get to drop into the experience the way that, later I would with other trainings and psychedelics. So it was wonderful, because it was wonderful to see so many people be healed and go through that. And it really like hammered home to me that, ayahuasca can heal PTSD. It can help people get over addiction and all this stuff, because I watched that kind of cycle through. But So yeah, super powerful, super beautiful, and I'm very thankful for that time.
Yeah. And so then you graduated from Miami?
Yep, I graduated and just I went full tilt. Like as soon as I graduated, I think I told my family like, psychedelic spirituality, that's the thing I want to do. They definitely did not like that. It was, that was hard to navigate for a bit. Like my extended family disowned me for a while. But that also kind of came at the right time because I ended up selling everything I owned, my car, my apartment, all the stuff that I kind of collected in the last decade. And then I just traveled with a backpack for at least 2.5 years before I kind of landed a little bit. And that was just staying at different ashrams and temples and zendos and, just following any teacher that felt like they might have an answer to what psychedelics and spirituality were.
And so what were some of the more meaningful experiences that happened on those travels?
Yeah, there's so many. It's like hard to really pinpoint some, but I'd say like one of the first big experiences for me was I stacked a bunch of Vipassana silent retreats back to back, 3 of them. And if anybody who's done a Vipassana silent retreat knows that like it can be kind of torturous. But so I think it was maybe the second retreat. So I had gone almost like 2 weeks of silence or 3 weeks of silence and just meditating like 8 hours a day. And I had a moment where like I came out of one of the meditations and it was just like a psychedelic experience. Like I was back in that ayahuasca experience and just walking around. And for me, that was a real big turning point because it was like, oh, it was real. Like that psychedelic experience was just as valid as this experience because it's the same thing. Like I'm experiencing it right now. And so that was probably one of the big moments for me. Another big moment was finding the Ram Dass community. He was just such a perfect teacher for psychedelics and spirituality. And I met so many people who had similar stories, like, this big, powerful psychedelic experience and then needing answers to it and finding, like Be Here Now or something as a real blueprint. So that was like a good coming home experience. And another big one would be going to India and guru hunting. I went with a handful of friends from the Ram Dass community, and we were just trying to find teachers who were hanging out in that space all the time, and meeting people that could literally invoke like an MDMA experience within me, like just being in the same room as that person. Really, like it bent my mind into ways to recognize, like, oh, it's not just an experience in a psychedelic sense or through meditation, but it's also like, people can be that experience. So those are some of the big ones for me, for sure.
Yeah. It's interesting. One of my teacher's assistant described in my master's program was describing this experience with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, where she experienced spontaneous higher states of consciousness just by being around him. And that was, that's such just a wild conception, right? For us in the Western world to even wrap our heads around. And I would just love to ask more about like what that's like.
Like I think until you experience it, the words, just like a psychedelic experience, really, the words don't fully capture what's going on in the space. But I can remember the first time it happened to me, it was like we were in this small ashram in the middle of the desert, and kind of we were just checking off the list, like, oh, let's go check out this guy and see what goes on there, and let's go check out these caves and see who's there. And we walked in, and like 3 out of the 5 of us just immediately started crying.
Wow.
And like I felt like it felt like taking a large dose of MDMA and like right at the come up of that experience where your heart just kind of bursts open. And it was just 100% this guru sitting there. And so we ended up spending several weeks there just hanging out, and had a lot of funky experiences like that, people will talk about when they talk about being near these enlightened beings, or these, higher consciousness beings, where, time doesn't feel real, and there's like weird synchronicities that just get turned up to the max. And it really just felt like a prolonged trip,
Yeah, that's so wild. And I want to go back to something else you mentioned as you were talking about those experiences. And the first one you said was when you're in that meditation retreat, meditating for 8 hours a day, and you had that transcendental experience, or however you want to frame it, that lets you know that that psychedelic experience was real. And, that's something that I think with the war on drugs and the culture we have on psychedelics, right? The stigma against psychedelics is so pervasive and multifaceted, right? And I think a lot of people think about the stigma of just it being illegal, being a drug, but then also, it's going to fry your brain, blah, blah, blah. But for folks like that have actually had the experience, I think that stuff's typically easier to get over. But one of the places I've continued to struggle is having had the ego dissolution experience on psychedelics and having read the spiritual texts. I believe intellectually that mystical experience is no different than the one experienced by saints or prophets or whoever throughout the ages, and therefore no less legitimate. Yet still, sometimes I struggle with that. Like I still want to minimize it to in some way because of I think just how we've come to view psychedelics and drugs in general in this culture.
Yeah, man, and I think you hit it right on the head. It's a nuanced process, right? Like you'll find the people who are like, just say no, and the like absolutely not. It's all bad. It's just a drug. And then like you go deeper and deeper into the process and the conversation, and you'll find like layers to people's resistance around it. And one of the ones I really bump up against now a lot, but I also did when I was just traveling and directly asking monks and yogis like, what's up with psychedelics? And it was like, the way that I can best kind of frame it is there's kind of two big camps right now in the spiritual world. There's the folks who are like from the 60s and 70s, who kind of take the line of, I think Alan Watts said this, as like, when you get the phone call, you can hang up the phone, or when you get the message, you can hang up the phone. Like essentially, use these as training wheels, or use them to open the door, and then, put them down and go back to real genuine practice or something like this, which I always found kind of ironic, because people telling me this were monks and nuns who were Westerners, who gave up their whole lives, traveled to, India or Nepal, and became monks and nuns based off of one or two psychedelic experiences. And I always was just blown away of like, so you never went back? Like you just stayed with the meditation? Okay, that's fine. And the other kind of school of thought now, which is kind of where I think I find myself in, and where I want the conversation to really be around, is like, can we integrate these into our spiritual practices? Maybe, maybe it's not a daily thing or a weekly thing or a monthly thing. Maybe it's a seasonal thing or a once a year type of thing. And I remember I just went to the Jewish Psychedelic Summit last year, and they had a panel of like 6 rabbis who were like, yeah, like once a year I go and I take some mushrooms or something to just check in with that space and remember that it's there. And the last little thing to think about too is that they did a study with MDMA in the 80s. I can't remember, it was like 84 or something, with Benedict monks. And they were just like, go through your regular practice, but, take this MDMA. So like, go pray and go meditate, but do this. And afterwards, they asked one of them, what the experience was like. And they said it was like, you're hiking in like the mist in the mountains, and the MDMA is like clearing the mist away for a moment. And you get a glimpse of the peak. You get a glimpse of where you're heading and how far you've come, and kind of that kind of clarity. And then the mist kind of comes back.
Wow. And it's funny what you say about Alan Watts, because, I've heard that quote as well too. And it's something that I've certainly, gone back and forth on. But yeah, I was listening to Sam Harris's app, he just added a bunch of Watts lectures.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and one of the ones that Watts was talking about on psychedelics was like, and it wasn't that specific quote, but it's something to those extents of like, okay, but then don't get lost in psychedelics, don't keep using them. But then he goes on to say, like, with the exception of, of course, if like you're a writer like me who's going to be writing about these experiences, like, no, so other people need to hang up the phone, but you're good to keep rolling, huh?
Yeah.
But I think. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, I think there's a place to recognize also what Ram Dass said, which is like, he has this like great piece where he talks about how high he tried to get. He kept trying to get higher and higher and stay high. And there was a period of time where he like locked himself in a room with some people and they just took as much LSD as they could for weeks, and then came back down. And so what I'll usually tell with clients is like, we're going to go up. Everybody's going to go up. You're going to go up in the psychedelic experience, but then you're going to come right back down. And the name of the game, I think, is to raise the floor. So it's like, can we combo psychedelics with spiritual practices and spiritual paths? And the practice will raise the floor so you don't come all the way crashing back down. And the psychedelics just give you that kind of peak glimpse where you can see like, oh, I know where I'm heading. I know where I've been. And, keep you moving along.
Yep. Like Aldous Huxley said, something like, to insist upon the hardest way to occasion every spiritual experience would be like saying we need to burn down the pig house every time we want roast pork. I'm sure I butchered it, but it's much more eloquent in his words.
Yeah, all the same for all the quotes I use here. I'm paraphrasing.
Funny. So you talked a lot about the Ram Dass community and like his impact on you. And so maybe you could tell a little bit more about who he was and his story for folks who may not be as familiar.
Oh yeah, he's the best, man. So very close with Tim Leary. Both of them, he was Richard Alpert at the time. Both of them were at Harvard, and they were the first to kind of pioneer Western studies. So they started kind of studying it in a semi-academic. If we look back at that now, it's not considered academic. At the time, it was considered academic. But they ended up, just dosing grad students all the time, and then started giving it to Aldous Huxley's crew and who's that? Houston Smith at MIT. So they would just give it to great thinkers and philosophers and musicians and poets, and just basically they said at one point they had like a big chart that was just how many doses they had given out, and they had fallen into the trap, which I think a lot of people nowadays still kind of have in the back of their minds, which is like, oh, if I just take this, I'll be enlightened. Or if I take this, I'll be healed. Or if I take this, whatever. It's the thing that will fix me. And this was kind of before they realized all of those things, right? They ended up getting both of them kicked out of Harvard for some, giving it to somebody they shouldn't have or something along those lines. Timothy Leary went on to, campaign to be the governor of California and was like tune in, drop out type of thing, and just tried to dose as many people as possible. And Ram Dass, or Richard Alpert at the time, went to India and kind of did what I did, which was just like, okay, I want to find somebody that has a map for this space, that knows what's going on there, that can tell me, which way's up and which way's down. And he found his spiritual teacher, Neem Karoli Baba, and spent a lot of time with him, wrote Be Here Now, which became like the hippie kind of Bible of the 70s, and came back and spent the rest of his life just giving lectures and teaching and really bringing the spiritual growth that he had in India, along with all of his psychological education and psychedelic experiences, and put it all together into one space, which is why I resonated so much with him, I think.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Oh yeah. So how did you get connected to the Ram Dass community originally?
Yeah. So during that academic phase, my professor gave me some book, like the Harvard Psychedelic Club or something like that, which kind of just outlined everything I just said about their lives. And kind of he used it as a medicine wheel, and in some sense for me, of okay, Ram Dass went spiritual, Timothy Leary went political, Houston Smith went academic, and I can't remember the other one that was with them off the top of my head, but he did something in the medical space and basically asked me, like as a professor, like, which one of those paths feels the right one for you, and the spiritual one did. And so I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. And I think I Googled it afterwards. I Googled him to find out more information about him, and I realized he was still alive. And I was like, oh my God, he's still alive. Like, I have to go see him. I have to figure this out. And so I signed up for the very next spiritual retreat that he was giving, which ended up falling right after that consecutive silent retreat space. And so I was super blissed out, just hanging out in that space and then bumping into a bunch of people that were younger, which was really nice because all the other spiritual communities, people were much older, and the younger people all had similar stories of powerful psychedelic experiences. And they were all craving what I was craving, which was some legitimizing of that space. Like Ram Dass was doing that for us, but we wanted more legitimate, like this is a real thing. It's real. And that's why we started looking for gurus and like other ways into that space to just confirm that what we were experiencing was real.
Wow. And I remembered what I was going to ask earlier. So when you were talking about that experiment with like the Benedictine monks and taking MDMA, it reminded me of the Good Friday experiment? Is that what it's called?
Yep.
Yeah. And could you remind me, like, if you're familiar, like what was the specifics around that event?
Yeah. So they gave a bunch of seminary students LSD or placebos, and they found out really quickly that the placebo, like compared to LSD, it doesn't really count. And so the study now doesn't necessarily qualify as academic because the placebo didn't feel like a double blind situation. But MAPS did follow up like 20 something years or 30 something years later. And the seminary students still said that it was the most meaningful mystical experience of their lives. And so I think there was not everybody, but I think it was like 10 or 7 had, these peak mystical unity experiences, which, propelled them forward on their seminary path. But the one thing that most people don't talk about is there was one student who had a negative reaction, ended up like running out of the church and I think taking his clothes off and screaming, and they had to sedate him and calm him down. And so I always found that interesting. It's like, 10 people are going to have these really beautiful experiences, but one's going to have a really challenging experience.
Yeah. It's interesting just hearing you talk about how many of these folks are saying that it was such a profound mystical experience for them. And to your point, like even in the spiritual communities of this day, like it's still, for whatever reason, seems to be delegitimized as a spiritual experience, or if not fully delegitimized, at least less, I don't know, or just like less okay, right? So it's just something you don't talk about. Maybe you had one of these experiences that kick things off, but like that's it, and we don't discuss it any further.
Yeah, and I'm just blown away by it because the people will tell me like how impactful like one LSD experience was, and how it changed their whole course of their lives. But then they'll at the same breath be like, okay, but put it down and like, grab your mantras and your yantras and don't think about it. And I think also it's a holdover of what happened, right? So like Ram Dass and Timothy Leary were out here just giving it to everybody, and 1 out of those 10, right, are going to have these really challenging experiences. And people were young, people were traveling around, they didn't have the psychological support they have now, and so people could really spin out into these really horrible places, and it could break their lives. And I think there's still like a fear around that and a recognition of that, which is really valid, but also just it to me, it feels like a shame of going to the full extreme, right? Like the one extreme being like, let's just give everybody LSD and psychedelics and it doesn't matter. And the other extreme being like, okay, these are super dangerous. Let's not touch them. Let's not figure out figure a way to integrate them into our lives or anything like that. And I think there's a middle path somewhere where we can find, good structures to put these things into. And that's where I feel really for me, the sadness is around these spiritual teachers who are so against it, because it's like, wait, no, talk to us, like help us put it into a container, into a ritual, into a ceremony, into a series of practices that will help propel somebody forward in a much faster way than 30 days in silence. Okay, maybe can we do 3 days in silence with this, and like what would that look like? But people are really resistant to even having that conversation.
Yeah. Well, and as you talk about that, it triggers to mind, the other person who I know that you mentioned to me was one of your kind of three most important spiritual guides on this journey, Terrence McKenna, and his idea of like the archaic revival.
Yeah.
And just bringing back that, why shouldn't psychedelics play an important part in a revival of these ancient shamanistic partnership societies, community with nature, not domination of nature? Like, why nature has blessed us with this incredibly effective, practical way of occasioning mystical experiences. We know the way to do it now in the right setting. And I understand that you can't just necessarily go from fully illegal, people not knowing what these are, to them being everywhere and kind of regurgitating what happened with Timothy Leary and everything. But it just, I don't know, it's just mind blowing to me that it's like that there's still this aversion to them within the spiritual community.
Yeah. And Terrence McKenna is like, he's such a trickster. I love him. Like just the way he could throw out like a dozen ideas that were so radical and so different, and just play in that space. And I remember watching an interview between him and Ram Dass, actually, where Ram Dass was essentially like kind of forced to take the position of like the hang up the phone space, or at least training wheels or something like this. And Terrence McKenna at the time, and this is, I think, probably the mid 80s or early 90s, somewhere in that range. And he said, do you think we could wake everybody up in time? Do you think that we have enough time for everybody to learn from gurus and everybody to learn how to meditate and go through these processes and everything like that? And at the time, like Ram Dass kind of skirted it, but here we are now in 2022, and it feels like it's all turned up. Like society is really in trouble right now, and we're really trying to figure out a way to handle things like climate change and globalization and all these other pieces. And so now I think that question is even more valid of, do we have the time to not use these tools? Do we have the time to not figure out spiritual paths that can incorporate psychedelics to speed up somebody's journey through like at least the early stages, to get the glimpse of that top of that mountain, to know like, okay, we all are one in some capacity, or the interconnectedness of reality that will really, I think, just drastically change civilization. Even in the cannabis work that I do, somebody will come into that experience, trying to work on some piece of trauma or history or something, and they'll come out of that experience and they'll go, I need to be in nature more, and I need to, eat a little bit better, and I don't know if I need to stay in this job that's doing this damage or this thing like that. And so I think we just need that. We need people to wake up faster than we have before.
Yeah, that was beautifully said. And I don't mean to also imply that it's a complete minimization from the spiritual leadership. Deepak certainly is big on it, or has talked about it openly and stuff.
Yeah, they're definitely coming around. Like the conversation is definitely shifting, and I think it will continue to shift. I know, there's the Jewish community in particular is actually turning towards this question in a more institutional way, which I find amazing and beautiful. And I think if we can get some of the other big traditions to start doing the same, it'll kick off. And it's not going to bring all of the the conservative folks in different traditions forward and stuff, but if we could just get like a handful of the traditions with like major churches and major synagogues and temples, figuring out ways to incorporate this and integrate it well, it'll speed us forward, I think, in a lot of really beautiful, powerful ways.
Totally. So I'd love to ask you about psychedelic harm reduction.
Oh, but yeah. Yeah. Any particular piece of that?
Yeah, I guess just more broadly, like what does that mean? Why is it important? What can people who may be newer or just haven't had the resources to know how to take psychedelics in a safe manner? Any advice that you could provide?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say is, just do research, right? There's so many wonderful organizations out there now that are, putting out free content, putting out ways to, really prepare yourself and get, into a safe container for this. So that'd be like the first one is just do your research, but never go go blind into these experiences. And then set and setting, right? We learned that from the 60s and 70s, which was like probably the big takeaway from that time period of like, where are you when you're doing these things? Are you at like a rave or a party, or you're with people that you don't feel safe? Like that's the number one way to have a bad experience. And then the set of just like what content are you bringing into that space, right? Are you in a really challenging moment of your life, or like should you be taking it right now, or should you wait to process some stuff in a sober state? And then the third piece of that is skill, right? And so we now know techniques that work really well in those spaces, right? Mindfulness practice will go a long way in a psychedelic experience. Having baseline understanding of your own psychology will go a long way in that space, and your own trauma will go a long way in that space. And so just setting, skill, those are the big three. And then also I need to name this because it's just such a big shadow piece right now within the psychedelic field, but because it's illegal, or most of them are illegal, there's a lot of underground practitioners. And so it's people going to underground circles or underground individuals and just being really safe with that and doing your due diligence on that, because there are a lot of people in that space that are just, using it for power or using it for money, and they're not safe. And we see it even within this most recent big break in the MAPS world of even trained psychologists can hurt people in that space. So it's just, doing your research, your due diligence, finding somebody that's going to be really safe to hold you, and knowing your setting and your skills.
Yep. That's great. And I think it's, you mentioned some of the additional harms, unfortunately, that are arbitrarily put into the space because of its inclusion in the Controlled Substances Act, and a couple others that unfortunately fall into that category are, since it's illegal, you don't know what you're really getting ever. So you got to be really careful with where you're getting the supply, and then dosage information can be harder to find. Although thankfully, I think that is coming around, but it's just something as an illegal drug, people don't necessarily pay as much attention to as they really should.
Yeah. That's a huge piece of just the fact that it is illegal means you don't really know what you're getting. You can't, right now I can go to a cannabis dispensary and I can find the exact strain and what percentage of THC is in it and all these other really, important things from my physiology and like how I'm going to interact with this thing. But you can't do that with mushrooms. You can't do that with LSD or MDMA or any of these other things. And when it comes to things like MDMA, it's like you don't even know what it's going to be cut with. It's been, it multiple times it cycles through, or fentanyl or something will come through and an overdoses spike. And so it's just, there's also plenty of places to find test kits online legally. They're illegal in certain states, they're legal in other ones. So just finding, again, due diligence and research about, where you can get these things. But there are tons of test kits, and I would always suggest that of like, doesn't matter really what you're taking, like make sure you know what you're taking before you take it.
That's so crazy that test kits are illegal in some states.
I know. It's insane to me. It's like, how are you going to make the testing illegal for this? There should be free testing in my mind, especially at festivals or these kinds of things where it's like, we know people are going to be imbibing these substances.
I mean, it's, well, we don't need to go down that rabbit hole. But maybe it would be interesting to get your thoughts on research and how the Controlled Substances Act has really made that more difficult in the psychedelic space. And I think then we can get into, how that potentially has impacted you directly through DMTx.
Yeah, it's a real mess. It's a real mess. What drives me crazy is things like THC, for instance, that are Schedule 1, which means there's no benefit. There's nothing that it could do. While simultaneously the government is patenting different parts of the cannabinoid system because they are patenting it as medicine. They know that it's like healing in some way. It's like it bonkers. And when they make it Schedule 1, then it's like, it's climbing a mountain just to get permission to use it in a study to see if it would work or not work. And there's plenty of people out there who will talk about their journeys through the MDMA space to try to get that legalized. Like MAPS just really had to hammer over and over and over again to get that through the process. And same with DMT and psilocybin. And yet at the same time, it's like every single study that comes out is just like, this works. Yeah. There's a lot of dangers and we got to hold it in a really special way, but it works. It works. And so, yeah, it's a real pain. It's a real pain. And it's like a headwind, when it comes to any of these organizations, how much money they have to dump into the legal process, how much money they have to dump in the regulatory process. And then that jacks up, the prices, it echoes back. And, I think we've briefly talked about this before with my work in the DMTx program, but that's what happens to us. It's like, I think we have 4 law firms on retainer or something like that. It's insane, just to move forward just a micro inch, just to get in a conversation with a lab or something.
Yikes. Well, on a better note, let's talk about what is DMTx.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So this is like the pet project, the fun project that I work on, where like my work is divided between the clinical side, which is, working with clients, spiritual counseling, the training side, which is training guides and facilitators. And then we have this third branch, which is kind of our research space, which is the DMTx program, and the X being for extended state, because DMT is the most powerful psychedelic on earth, and it's the most fascinating one. And it's also the fastest acting. So they used to call it the businessman psychedelic, because the full experience can be done in about 20 minutes and you could hop in a vehicle like an hour later and be at work. So it's totally this contained experience, but it's also just so jarring because it's so fast and it's just this instant, yank out of our reality and into another reality. And Rick Strassman, who pioneered the psychedelic renaissance, essentially, his work in the 90s on DMT opened the door to the rest of these things. Really talked about in that time of like, wow, it's this doorway to this other world, and people are coming into contact with entities and other things like that. But it's so fast acting. Like, I'm not sure if it's going to be the real thing to heal people. And then Andrew Gallimore, that's his name, Andrew Gallimore, who's a scientist in Okinawa, I believe that's where he's at right now, wrote a bunch of papers on, okay, well, now we have all the numbers from Rick Strassman's study. I think we could just put DMT into an anesthesia machine and keep people in that space for a prolonged period of time. So he wrote up this paper and then worked with Rick Strassman again. And so they wrote up another paper and basically said like, yes, it's possible. We can do this. It's a thing. But nobody's really super interested in that right now. I think Imperial College is the only space other than ours, which is even considering working with extended state DMT. And for us, it's more, I would land in the word playful, but it's, we take it very seriously and we hold it with a lot of intention, but we really just want to explore that space and see if it's real and see if, keeping folks in that space for a longer period of time brings the same type of healing that comes from, say, an ayahuasca experience, without the cultural damage that can be done with that, without the damage of like cutting into the rainforest to get these supplies, all of those things that could come with that. And then be really safe and easy with the doses, just like exact for what somebody needs. So there's just a ton of possibilities that open up in that space, but that's the plan right now.
Wow. So maybe to kick off, could you explain a little bit more about, what is DMT? What is ayahuasca? What are some of the, and I know you touched on some of these, but just like some of the more things that are like really unique about DMT versus some of the other psychedelic experiences?
Sure. Yeah. So dimethyltryptamine and DMT, it is the most powerful psychedelic on earth. And we've known about it. Humans have known about it for thousands of years because tribes in the Amazon have made it into a brew. So they took a root that's an MAOI inhibitor and mixed it with a root that has a lot of DMT in it. And together you can ingest that. And that leads to about an 8-hour experience on ayahuasca, which, for me was the most powerful experience of my life. And I've seen that and heard that from many, many other people. And so that's kind of the combination. That's the only way to really get it orally, but you can smoke it or vaporize it, or, in our case, put it into an anesthesia machine, and just the pure form of DMT. And that experience, smoked or inhaled, it's, about 15 to 20 minutes peak experience, so about 3 to 5 minutes. And in that time window, it's turning up the dial for, I'd say, any psychedelic experience where, with something like psilocybin or LSD, you usually need like a larger dose, 5 grams plus in the case of psilocybin, to get these like ego death, travel to a different universe kind of experience. Whereas DMT, it's like, microscopic dose compared to that. And it's almost guaranteed that experience will happen in some capacity or another. And then the fact that it's produced in our bodies, that's the part that also really blows my mind. It's an endogenous substance, which means, it's produced slightly in our liver a little bit. It's also produced in our brain when we go into REM sleep. So we get like very microscopic amounts then. And then when we die or have a near-death experience, there's this big dump of DMT. And that's also kind of where it's getting its name as the spirit molecule. Like there's this just real fascination. And at least for me, that's what sparked my real interest in it, is this. Right, so it's this thing that happens when we die, and and it elicits a near-death experience nearly every single time. What's going on here? Like what role does this play in our evolution? What role does it play in the nature of reality? And so those are really just like the fun, like, wow, what is this thing, and why is it in us? It's also in nearly every ecosystem on Earth. It's something like 80% of the ecosystems on Earth. So it's all around us all the time.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Do you think when you're deep in meditation and having it, and those experiences can happen, like could that also be some form of release of DMT?
There are certainly people who believe that. We don't have the studies yet to kind of back that space up. There's like big breathwork communities who work what's called like DMT breathing, and trying to elicit that experience. But we don't yet have any kind of scientific academic proof to back that up yet.
Gotcha. And so what have been some of your experiences on DMT?
Yeah, mostly the typical experience that people will talk about, like, instantly being shot out of my body towards the center of the universe. And then the stuff that's just real fascinating to me is the entity encounters. So it's like I've experienced a lot of these different psychedelics, and outside of ayahuasca and DMT, it's really like an experience of me, right? Whether I'm interacting with reality in some capacity, or I'm interacting with some version of myself, my traumas, my higher self, something like this. But with DMT and ayahuasca, they're the only ones that I really felt like there's something other than me in that space interacting with me. And that's like, yeah, that's the big takeaway for me of DMT, of just like, who is that? What is that? Is that real? Is it just a part of me that doesn't feel like me, but then why don't I experience that with, say, psilocybin or ketamine or something else, even though, I'm getting into that same space where everything kind of merges into one. It's this I-thou relationship that doesn't really come across in other psychedelics.
Have you been able to communicate with the entities ever?
The ayahuasca ones, for sure, it feels like there's a bit of back and forth there. But not so much on the DMT level, because it's so quick. I basically have enough time to realize that I'm interacting with something, and then I'm kind of yanked out of that space.
What did they look like in the ayahuasca versus the DMT sessions?
It's real hard to describe, any kind of one piece of a psychedelic experience, because you're feeling all of the things at the same time, right? Like the colors and the shapes and the sounds, and then there's an emotion evoked in you, and so it's kind of all blurred into one. The closest I could really describe it is like, I feel like the ayahuasca had a very mother ayahuasca. It was a very feminine and a very kind of earthy kind of sense to it, whereas the DMT entities were more like, I would say closer to the extraterrestrial, explanation of something. It's like a being of pure light and love. And there's also kind of a more mechanical feel to the DMT space. It's hard to put into words.
Like almost more like geometric.
Yeah. I mean, there's like, all of them bring up some version of geometry, which is, there's got to be some connection to this and sacred geometry and like all of these ways of interacting with our reality. And so there's that element too, but there is just like, there's a sharpness or mechanicalness to the DMT that, I mean, I don't know if everybody experiences that. It's pretty common, and from the folks that I've interacted with on the DMTx program. And there's also a question in my mind too of like synthetic versus natural extraction of DMT. And I think my early DMT experiences were many years ago, and I don't know if it was synthetic or natural, and so hard to kind of piece out what's going on in that space exactly.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then how does NMDMT vary from 5-MeO-DMT?
Yeah, fascinating, because they're radically different in some senses and very similar in other senses. They're both, very fast acting. Both of them have some version of an analog in our bodies. DMT, NMDMT, which is what I'm mostly working with and interested in, has what I explained before, this I-thou relationship, where there's still some version of your consciousness in that space, even if you feel like the barriers between you and reality are melding or merging in some capacity. There's still a recognition of like, oh, this is me interacting with this thing, where 5-MeO-DMT is this unity experience that blasts that away, and you kind of fade away, and there's not this interaction between you and something else, because it's all kind of one thing. And it's interesting because in talking to DMT manufacturers and trying to legally find paths that we can make the DMTx program happen, most of the folks that we have interacted with in the lab side have been like, well, we can give you 5-MeO-DMT right now if you'd like it. Which always blew us away, because 5-MeO is generally considered even more powerful than DMT as far as just like a powerful experience. And it's one of those things where even holding the space for 5-MeO-DMT, we at least take the position of that you need even more training than you would with regular DMT.
Wow. Have you had any 5-MeO-DMT experiences?
I actually have not. It's definitely on my list of things to do before I die, but I just haven't had the opportunity. Yeah, before I really die.
Yeah, that's wild. Are you familiar with Graham Hancock's work?
Yes, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, so I haven't read his one that he did like more focused on, ayahuasca DMT, although that is on the top of my list. But I read his most recent book, and he was talking about basically that one of the stories that he learned about ayahuasca and DMT was that the native peoples had said these supernatural beings brought them to the rainforest and then left them ayahuasca as a way to communicate with them. So, I mean, it's as wild as this all can sound to folks, like it actually is a pretty consistent story that there is some non-human entity in this transcendental space.
Yeah. It's fascinating to me because that I almost mentioned that when I had mentioned, what DMT was and ayahuasca, because that's, they consistently say that across many different tribes and groups of people. They're like, no, the spirits told us that this is how you do it. And like on the face of it, as Westerners, we can really discard that really easily. But at the same time, it's like there are millions of plants and combinations. And like, how could they possibly have known that this plant has DMT in it and this plant has a 5-MeO inhibitor? And together they create this thing that just, blasts you into another reality, or allows you to communicate with the spirit world, or, however language you want to frame it. It's truly like mind blowing, and, feeds back, I think, and, we don't have to go down this rabbit hole, but it feeds back into, I think, a movement that's happening right now in modern philosophy. And I was picking up on this when I was, in 2016 when I was studying it. But now it's kind of picked up speed. And I think because of the psychedelics, this is the case. There's also been several studies to back up what I'm about to say. But basically, panpsychism, which is a philosophical view that, consciousness is the fundamental nature of reality, and, matter and other things come out of that experience. And that, panpsychism in some way lines up really well with animism, which is just the kind of baseline for indigenous cultures of like, everything has a spirit and it's all kind of one thing connected. And somehow I think these things are all spinning around each other in a constellation, as we as Westerners and Western civilization trying to wrestle with, what does our next version of spirituality look like? What does our next version of culture look like? And I think in some way psychedelics plays a role in connecting us to these other ways of viewing consciousness.
Man, that was so well said, and I just I'm super excited to see this confluence of what's happening right now in all these different fields of research, and I would add archaeochemistry to that mix, right? And you're seeing more and more compelling evidence that origins of Christianity may have had a lot to do with a psychedelic sacrament, which could have been then borrowed from the Greeks, which used the same sacrament for all of these great thinkers like Plato and Socrates. And like, the more you unravel this onion, the more the story fits together.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's tons of great research coming out for that. And same in ancient Judaism, they just found cannabis in several temples. And, it's just like a recognition that it's actually pretty unusual as a culture that we have gotten rid of any of these mind expanding substances. And, we sanction things like alcohol that's, great at numbing, our pains. And we've sanctioned things like coffee, which is really great at speeding us up and helping us work. But we, ostracized all these other things that would help us, recontextualize our life and, process our traumas and come together in community. And I think we're also seeing the result of pushing those substances so far away from us.
We are where we are, but it feels like there's a lot of momentum picking up to take things in the right direction. And you're certainly a huge part of that. So thank you for everything that you're doing.
Oh, yeah. And so are you. I mean, getting it out here in podcasts and just helping it just seed in people's consciousness that these things aren't these evil, demonic, dangerous things that we need to like push away from us.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's just like, even talking about it openly, right? And you were talking about this, with regards to spiritual leaders. And then I'm currently taking a master's in consciousness, and I see it in my class. Like, I'm one of the few people who I think feels pretty comfortable just bringing up these experiences, even though like several of my classmates have either, offline or one off in class, been like, yeah, I did have this experience and it was one of the most profound in my entire life. And we're in a course studying consciousness, yet still people are, just struggle to be honest and open about it.
Yeah. It's also, I mean, it's a huge part of our trainings too. I think our first level training, when it's just like, how do you sit with people in these spaces? And what comes up so often is the trauma of the, war on drugs, of just like, I can't talk about this. I can't hold it in any way. Like the resistance that comes up in people. And it's such a shame because, even to this day right now, we can go back now and look and listen to Ronald Reagan and listen to Nixon's, I can't remember the guy that was the head of
John Ehrlich.
Yeah. We listen to these guys say, oh, we made them illegal to hurt the hippies. We made them illegal to hurt Black folks. We made them illegal to stop the anti-war movement. And at the same time, they're patenting, different parts of these things and putting it into like MK Ultra and studying it. It's a real shame because it's so very clear to us that these were never illegal because they were, harmful to us. They were illegal because they were harmful to the government.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, while all this is going on, our intelligence agencies are going to be profiteering off of the illegal trafficking of drugs.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Wow. But on that note, you mentioned, the training that you do, and would love to hear a little bit more about, what is the work that you guys are doing in medicinal mindfulness?
Yeah. So our training program is called Psychedelic Sitter School. And originally it had started with our founder, Daniel McQueen. Basically, he was going to be an underground practitioner, like knew it ahead of time, but was like, okay, I want to get all the skills that I need in order to do that. And then cannabis became legal. And he was like, actually, let me just try it with cannabis, and ended up seeing how powerfully healing it could be in the right containers, and built a protocol and a training around that. And his wife, Allison, who runs our clinic here, worked on the MAPS MDMA studies. So she brought all of that information into the space. And we created this really wonderful program of like, okay, how do you sit and hold space in these things? And, what are some of the things that could come up in that space? And then we got a level 2 training, which is like how do you guide somebody in the space? They're in a really challenging, loop or moment in the journey. And, what are some interventions that could kind of help somebody navigate through that? And then we have a level 3, which is, clinical work, how do you hold trauma? How do you help process trauma? Also, all of these are talking about preparation and integration, and like, how do you have those conversations with people? And then we have just a ton of electives, which, range from first aid, which is like crisis intervention, anything that would be like an overdose, bad reaction to the drugs or something like this, to now we have ketamine practicums, so how do you kind of work with ketamine? And hopefully in 2023, which is it's kind of the other big project I'm holding, international retreats for psilocybin and DMT, and facilitating those as well, where, you'll have opportunities to experience the medicine in a legal, safe container, and then also help hold space for somebody in that experience.
Wow, that's really cool. So you're staying busy is the long and the short of it.
Yes, very, very busy. It's amazing because I came on really 2019. So I was there for about a year before COVID really hit. But, the bulk of my work has been during COVID, and we have just expanded, added 7 therapists to our clinical team, added 3 or 4, administration on the training side. And it just growing and growing. Now we're adding different medicines in the international space. So it's a beautiful thing. Yeah. Beautiful thing.
And if someone is interested in either coming in for a session to, talk about their life and how to use psychedelics safely, or even going through the training programs, do they have to live in Boulder, or what's the best, kind of process for next steps for them?
Yeah, fortunately, because of COVID, we had to move into the online space. And so Psychedelic Sitter School is available in a virtual format right now. It's actually probably our primary. We do in-person trainings, but our in-person is maybe 12 people, and our online, gets up into 40s and 50s. And so that's super accessible. you can go through that process virtually. And then kind of the same thing for the clinical side. You can come in for sessions, but if it's just harm reduction or, integration processing or any of these kinds of things, we can coach over state lines. And so we can do virtual Zooms and that kind of thing.
That's interesting. So there's like a regulatory element to what the course is for, that like it depends on whether they have to be in state or not.
Yeah, well, for the clinical side, there is a regulatory, because our clinical side is working with ketamine and cannabis. And so that ketamine is a federal thing, which, we have a DEA license and have to go through all of these things. And that can't be done over state lines. And then the cannabis piece, because it's not federally legal, can be done over state lines. But we usually don't like to do our first sessions with somebody virtually. So it is an option technically, but we really prefer to do it in person for medicine work.
God, just the like weird wackiness of our drug laws, just the hoops.
Tell me, I mean, when I started working at this clinic, the ketamine became legal while we were working at the clinic. They gave us our DEA license, but cannabis was still not legal. Like we couldn't smoke in the, we're like, hey, cannabis is not legal right now. What's going on here? So funny.
It's so funny. And I meant to ask you about, well, actually, two things. One, exciting, and I didn't even know this was going on, but I was at the park on Sunday, and someone mentioned that they're looking to put psilocybin on the ballot for the end of this year and hopefully legalize it like in Oregon. So that'd be pretty exciting.
Yeah, there's two big movements. I think it's going to be two different ballots for Colorado. Not to get everybody's hopes up, I don't think either will pass right now, but it's great that there is the movement to pass them, and that people are engaging in the conversation of like, what do psychedelic clinics look like? What do how can we decrim? Do we legalize? So it's the Wild West right now. Who knows which states will go where and how they'll do it? And everybody, I think, is holding their breath in Oregon to see like how does that all pan out. But it's moving, everybody's trying for sure.
Yeah, that's great. And I realized I forgot to ask you when we were talking about DMTx, how has the process gone for you guys in terms of actually getting the regulatory approvals to get everything going, and where are you in that process?
Yeah, that has been a real journey, a real journey. So, unfortunately, it's not really possible in the United States right now. So all of our work is focused on, international locations and spaces. So it kind of moved while I've been working on it from a space of like really theoretical to actually talking to DMT manufacturers. I think Canada and the UK are the main ones we've been in conversation with. And so it's really working with them to figure out, can they export it? What are their restrictions on it? And then working with our allies in Costa Rica and Jamaica and other places on importing licenses. And, there's so many gray areas and there's so many spaces of like, can this work? Can this not work? And we could basically get it working right now today, but it would be in a gray area. And we don't really want to do that in any way, shape, or form, because there's so much writing on this, and we're connected to the training and the clinic, and we don't want to endanger anybody's licensing, and we don't want to endanger anybody's process. And so it's just moving real slow. It is moving though. Several manufacturers have basically said yes in the exporting space, and we've had several folks on the ground and those other countries saying yes to the importing. And it's just a matter of, kind of dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's, and really it's all of these legal pieces. That's why we have 4 legal spaces on retainer right now, and really making sure everything is ironclad and super tight, and so that we can do it without anybody being in danger in any way.
Sure. Wow. Well, we'll have to have you back on after you guys get everything going and have it happen and hear what you learned about.
Oh yeah, definitely. That'll be far out. I'm sure. I don't know what we're going to find, but it's going to be far out. That's for sure.
Yeah. You will not be the same person you were today.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Jay, thank you so much for coming on. This has been such a blast.
Oh yeah. So happy to do it. And thanks for having me. And thanks for just creating a space like this for folks to talk about these things and, bring it into everybody's consciousness. It's super important.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I'll make sure to post a link to Medicinal Mindfulness for anyone who wants to check it out further in the show notes. So Jay, thanks again and have a great rest of your evening.
Thanks.
Outro for this and all episodes is available at entangledpodcast.substack.com. Please enjoy. Thanks everyone for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the episode. Let's take some time to talk about DMT and its potential for establishing interspecies communication. Now, for the hardened materialists out there, this idea that drugs could actually be used to communicate with entities in another dimension is likely a bridge too far to cross. These wackos have really lost it on this one, right? But is it so crazy? In this episode, Jay mentioned the concept of panpsychism, or the theory that consciousness is the foundational essence of the universe through which we are all connected. I've become convinced that panpsychism serves as the best model of cosmology we humans have yet developed, at least by people not locked under non-disclosure agreement within secret military and intelligence programs. In part 1 of this outro, I'll discuss some of the physics of panpsychism and its relevance for our ability to communicate with sentient, non-human beings. Specifically, I'll be referencing Dr. John Hagelin's mathematical formalism of panpsychism with the unified field of consciousness theory. In part 2, I'll discuss some of the projects and technologies which I believe hold the most promise for developing communication with these beings, including the DMTx program. Part 1. The physics of panpsychism and its implications for interspecies communication. One of the most important people in the development of modern panpsychist philosophy was Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. Maharishi, who'd spent 12 years living in the Himalayas learning ancient Vedic wisdom, also studied modern physics at Allahabad University in the 1940s. Maharishi came to recognize that the field of pure consciousness, as described in the Vedas, and the unified field theory pursued by modern physicists were one and the same thing. And on Substack, I've included one of my favorite charts from Dr. Craig Pearson's book, The Complete Book of Yogic Flying, which highlights the qualitative similarities between unified field theory proposed by string theorists and the field of pure consciousness as understood by Indian rishis for over 5,000 years. Maharishi explained that the entire cosmos could be described as a self-interacting field of being, or pure consciousness. This field of being ranges from the unmanifested, absolute, eternal state to the gross, relative, ever-changing states of phenomenal life, as the ocean ranges from the eternal silence at its bottom to the great activity of ever-changing nature on the surface of the waves. Maharishi noted that being has two sides, one being absolute, the other being relative. Years earlier, Einstein had argued that everything in the universe is relative, and the existence of worlds, phenomenon, and form could only be accounted for in terms of relativity. Maharishi would state that Einstein's theory was not wrong, but rather incomplete, as it only concerned itself within the realm of manifest creation. Maharishi further recognized that Einstein was open to the possibility of one common denominator of all creation, as Einstein had spent the last years of his life searching for a unified field theory or theory of everything. In 1966, Maharishi noted that the day does not seem far off when some theoretical physicist will succeed in establishing a unified field theory. Maharishi's prediction proved correct when in 1987, physicist Dr. John Hagelin published Is Consciousness the Unified Field? A Field Theorist's Perspective. His theory of the unified field of consciousness provides a mathematical model uniting Einstein's geometric theory of gravity with the electromagnetic force. Importantly, Hagelin emphasizes that the discovery of the unified field is not a philosophical development. It is a scientific development of the foremost order, a rigorous mathematical development based upon the Lagrangian of the unified field, a highly mathematical formula that describes the self-interacting dynamics of unity at the basis of all the diverse laws of nature governing the universe. And again on Substack, I've included Hagelin's mathematical formalism of this equation, which reads like hieroglyphics to me, but emphasizes the point again that this is not a philosophical theory, but rather one upon which we can and have built applied technologies. Now let's think about the cosmos in the context of one structured by the unified field of consciousness, and how this relates to our more familiar dimensions of space and time. The following comes from a declassified report in which Army Intelligence Officer Lieutenant Colonel Wayne McDonald analyzes the gateway experience, which I'll discuss further in part 2. Physicists define time as a measurement of energy or force in motion. It is a measurement of change. However, in order for energy to be in motion, it must first be limited in some way within the confines of some sort of vibratory pattern, so that its confinement gives it the capacity for being contained at a specific location which is distinguishable from other locations, space. Energy which is not confined is force without limit, without dimension, without the limits of form. It is infinity, cannot move because there is nothing beyond infinity, and is therefore outside of the dimension of time. It is also beyond space because that concept implies that a specific energy form is limited to a specific location and is absent from other locations. But if energy is in the state of infinity, there are no boundaries, no here to differentiate from there, no sense of area. It has no beginning, no end, no location. It is conscious force, the fundamental, primal power of existence without form, a state of infinite being. Energy, therefore, should be considered within the context of time, space, and consciousness. Let's next consider that there are 3 categories of dimensions relevant for this discussion. Number 1, classical space-time dimensions. Number 2, intervening dimensions. And number 3, the absolute and infinity, or the unified field of all the laws of nature. The first category, classical space-time, is where most of us spend our waking existence. These are your familiar 3 dimensions of space, length, width, and height, bound by a 4th dimension of time. Physics, as accepted by consensus science, holds for units of energy greater than the Planck scale, which can be expressed in distance, time, or energy. For simplicity, I'll refer to Planck distance, or 10 to the negative 33 centimeters. The third category, the unified field, is known by physicists as simply the absolute, and is the state referred to by Lieutenant Colonel McDonald above when he described unbounded energy. This primal state of existence is also what has been called names like God, the Holy Spirit, and pure consciousness by spiritual traditions for millennia. As is said in the Rig Veda, truth is one, but the wise know it as many. Now, category 2, the intervening dimensions, this is where the fun begins. This relates to oscillations of energy smaller than the Planck scale, but that are not at complete rest. In John Hagelin's words, there is little reason to believe that the familiar concepts of space, time, and causation have meaning at the Planck scale. Gravitational fluctuations at this scale are expected to produce a phase transition in the structure of space-time geometry at the Planck scale. And thanks for bearing with me during this physics-heavy part of the essay. Now, what's the point? How does all of this relate to contact with sentient, non-human beings? First, let me say that I've come to believe that the universe is far more complicated than we've been led to believe. That there are all kinds of living entities outside of our familiar human, animal, and plant life, and so I hope people recognize that the further outside of the boundaries of our dimensions of classical space-time, the more abstract reality becomes. For simplicity's sake, I'll highlight 2 types of sentient beings with whom we should be establishing communications. First, transdimensional entities who exist in these intervening dimensions. Therefore, they are not bound by our understanding of time, space, and causation, do not necessarily have physical bodies, and are not necessarily bound to the human construct of death. These entities include beings such as spirits, angels, etc. Number 2, extraterrestrial biological entities who live on other planets in our known universe and are thus bound by the same classical physics of space-time. However, these EBs have developed technologies sophisticated enough such that they're able to travel transdimensionally through these intervening dimensions. With all that in mind, now how do we talk to them? Part 2, Possibilities for Interspecies Communication. In considering the development of interspecies communication, I think about broad strategy in 3 categories. Number 1, the development of technologies to assist human consciousness in transitioning to these intervening dimensions wherein we can communicate with beings in energetic form. Number 2, the development of a language wherein we can communicate with sentient beings who have manifested on or near planet Earth, either in physical or energetic form. And 3, the development of consciousness-assisted technologies that can phase in and out of these intervening technologies. These technologies will eventually be able to take humans in physical form to other places in the universe and not be bound by our classical laws of space-time when doing so. Here I'll focus on categories 1 and 2 as they require less sophisticated technological advancement. However, I'd note that certain unacknowledged special access programs within the military intelligence industrial complex are likely much farther along on the development of Category 3 technologies than most of us would imagine possible. DMTx, or Extended State DMT, Type 1 communication. As we think about transitioning human consciousness to these intervening dimensions, one aspect of human physiology that shows up repeatedly is the importance of the hormones controlled by the pineal gland. This includes serotonin, melatonin, and a special psychedelic compound. You guessed it, N,N-dimethyltryptamine, or DMT. Not only is DMT produced endogenously, it can also be ingested exogenously, typically either through smoking pure DMT or by drinking it in ayahuasca, a brew that combines DMT with a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which enables your digestive system to break down the DMT. Users of DMT consistently report the complete replacement of normal subjective experience with a novel, alternate universe, often densely populated with a variety of strange objects and other highly complex visual content, including what appear to be sentient, intelligent, and powerful beings, many of which actively interact with the individual. While the state of consciousness produced by smoking DMT is one of the most extraordinary of all naturally occurring psychedelic substances, the duration of its effects is extremely short, typically less than 20 minutes. This short duration makes academic inquiry into this state of consciousness much more challenging. This issue led pharmacokinetic researcher Dr. Andrew Gallimore and DMT researcher Dr. Rick Strassman to propose in 2016 the use of target-controlled intravenous infusion of DMT to prolong the DMT state, using the same technology as currently used to maintain stable brain concentrations of anesthetic drugs during surgery. As Reverend Jay discussed in this episode, this paper led to the creation of the DMTx program led by Jay, Daniel McQueen, Dr. Carla Clements, and a team of about 24 volunteers. Jay and the team are now in the final stages of launching the study to research this realm of extended state DMT, including whether they can establish consistent communication with these powerful beings. The DMT state of consciousness experienced by modern explorers is consistent with those experienced by the native tribes of the Amazon, who have used DMT and ayahuasca for thousands of years. In his book America Before, investigative journalist Graham Hancock describes the origin myth of the Tucano people. The origin myth speaks of a time, eons ago, when humans first settled the great rivers of the Amazon basin. It seems that supernatural beings accompanied them on this journey and gifted them the fundamentals upon which to build a civilized life. In this period, the spirit beings prepared the land so that mortal human creatures might live on it. Once that task was completed, however, the supernaturals returned to their otherworldly abodes. Before leaving, they took care to provide mankind with the means of communication, of establishing contact with them whenever there should be need. Mortal men should not be left alone without the possibility of communicating with the spirit world. The effective means of contacting the spirit world turns out to be ayahuasca, a plant that opened the door into another dimension, a drug that produced visions in which the spirit beings revealed themselves to men, talking, teaching, admonishing, and protecting. So in summary, native peoples working with DMT have always understood the substance as a portal to communicate with the spirit world. Modern psychonauts using DMT consistently report encountering sentient beings external to their own consciousness. And the physics of a consciousness-based cosmology supports the existence of intervening dimensions in which these entities can exist. Maybe the materialists are right, and these beings just represent nothing more than hallucinations from our unconscious mind, and the stories of the native Amazonians are simply myths to teach lessons. Or maybe these beings are actually real, and we should learn what they're trying to tell us. Activating the pineal gland, type 1 communication. Accessing legal, exogenous DMT is difficult for the vast majority of the world due to its inclusion as a Schedule I substance in the Controlled Substances Act of 1970 and the UN Convention on Psychotropic Substances of 1971. Thankfully, mystical traditions throughout the ages have developed advanced meditation techniques to activate the pineal gland, also known as the third eye chakra and the eye of Horus. These techniques support the occasioning of mystical experiences without the need to ingest a psychedelic compound. In the modern era, Dr. Joe Dispenza has been one of the leading researchers of the pineal gland and its ability to transition consciousness outside of our dimensions of classical spacetime. His applied techniques have helped practitioners achieve transcendent states of consciousness. While I'm not aware of any Dispenza meditations focused on communication with non-human sentient beings, conceptually his pineal gland activation techniques should work the same as the DMTx program. Dispenza explains, the pineal gland is a crystalline superconductor that sends, as well as receives, information through the transduction of energetic vibrational signals, frequencies beyond the senses, also known as the quantum field or unified field, and translates it into biological tissue, the brain and the mind, in the form of meaningful imagery, the same way as an antenna translates different channels onto a TV screen. Dr. Dispenza's meditation techniques emphasize many of the physiological effects needed to transition consciousness into intervening dimensions, including, number 1, the piezoelectric effect of calcite crystals in the pineal gland. Number 2, the movement of breath through the nervous system to exert intrathecal pressure on the pineal gland. And 3, positive emotions from the heart chakra to amplify the transduction effects of the brain. The Gateway Experience, Type 1 Communication. The Gateway Experience is a course of advanced meditation techniques designed to guide meditators from the physical waking state through deep relaxation and ultimately into unexplored dimensions of consciousness. These tapes are designed to help practitioners control non-physical energy and develop skills considered to be paranormal by most, including remote viewing, out-of-body experiences, and contact with non-physical friends. The Gateway Experience was developed by the Monroe Institute, founded in the early 1970s to facilitate the exploration of human consciousness. In Part 1, I referenced a report analyzing the Gateway Experience written by Army Intelligence Officer Lieutenant Colonel Wayne McDonnell in 1983. The report was declassified in 2003, but did not receive much attention from the public until a few years ago. One thing I want to highlight here. Today in June 2022, most of the general public still does not believe in the science of consciousness or the ability of humans to develop psychic abilities. However, this is absolutely not the case within the intelligence community, where the truth in these abilities is considered somewhat of an open secret. Most people think that mind control programs like MKUltra and the remote viewing program led by Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff represent the full extent of the intelligence community's work on consciousness. Unfortunately, the true depth of these secret programs is much more extensive, remains highly significant, and continues to this present day. Putting all that to the side, McDonnell's report was written to assess how the Gateway Experience works and its practical application as a training tool for other members of the intelligence community. McDonnell writes, fundamentally, the Gateway Experience is a training system designed to bring enhanced strength, focused, and coherence to the amplitude and frequency of brainwave output between the left and right hemispheres so as to alter consciousness, moving it outside the physical sphere so as to ultimately escape even the restrictions of time and space. What differentiates the Gateway Experience from other forms of meditation is its use of the hemisync technique, a state of consciousness defined when the EEG patterns of both brain hemispheres are simultaneously equal in amplitude and frequency. The gateway experience takes advantage of a phenomenon known as frequency following response, FFR, in which the brain mimics the same frequency pattern of what the person is hearing. The FFR technique leverages binaural beats, in which the left ear plays a frequency slightly below the right ear, say 10 Hz for example. This tricks the brain into picking up this difference in frequency, the beat, which is a frequency that cannot typically be heard by the human ear, and helps put the brain into a theta brainwave pattern. Theta brainwaves are typically associated with sleep, so this process facilitates a unique physiological state wherein the body is asleep but the mind remains alert. Further, McDonald highlights the importance of resonance in facilitating the transition of consciousness into intervening dimensions. The gateway experience helps to alter the fundamental resonance pattern of the human body by eliminating the bifurcation echo of the heart, so that the sound of the heartbeat can move synchronously up and down the circulatory system in harmonious resonance approximately 7 times a second. By placing the body in a sleep-like state, the gateway tapes achieve the same goal as meditation, in that it places the body in such a profoundly relaxed state that the bifurcation echo slowly fades away as the heart lessens the force and frequency with which it pushes blood into the aorta. As a result of this brainwave coherence and full body resonance from the elimination of the bifurcation echo, human consciousness is now primed to pass into these intervening dimensions. McDonald goes on to explain, to enter these intervening dimensions, human consciousness must focus with such intense coherence that the frequency of the energy pattern which comprises that consciousness, i.e. the brainwave output, can accelerate to the point where the resulting frequency pattern would look virtually like a solid line. Any oscillating frequency reaches 2 points of complete rest, which constitute the boundaries of each individual oscillation. For an infinitesimally small instant, when energy reaches one of its 2 points of rest, it clicks out of time-space and joins infinity. That critical step out of time-space occurs when the speed of the oscillation drops below 10 to the negative 33 centimeters, Planck's distance. Once again, by learning how to transition our consciousness into these intermediate dimensions, we should be able to communicate with other intelligent beings in those dimensions. Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind Protocols, or CE5, Type 1, Type 2 hybrid. CE5 involves humans initiating peaceful, bilateral contact with ETs through conscious, voluntary, and proactive cooperative communication. Dr. Stephen Greer, who founded the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence in 1990, developed these protocols as a means for establishing diplomatic relations with extraterrestrials. Dr. Greer had experienced both extraterrestrial encounters and had a near-death experience in his youth, which gave him the conviction that ETs were real and that everything in the cosmos was unified through consciousness. Dr. Greer also trained as a transcendental meditation teacher, and like Dr. John Hagelin, much of his work is built off of Maharishi Vedic science. During CE5 events, groups of meditators collectively project thoughts of peace and invite ETs from around the galaxy to show themselves in any manner which is safe and appropriate for them to do so. Meditators vector in their specific geographic location while in deep meditation, then use a combination of lights, tones, and/or electromagnetic equipment to communicate their exact location in our classical dimensions of space-time. Groups of meditators are able to initiate the CE5 protocols more successfully than individuals due to the field effects of consciousness and what's known as constructive interference. As Hagelin explains, the radiated power emanating from a group of meditators will grow as the square of the number of meditators in the group, i.e., grow quadratically as opposed to linearly. This is because the amplitude or height of a wave is equal to the sum of all the contributing waves that occupy a common space. Yet the power of that resulting combined wave is proportional to the square of the height of that wave. That is why, for example, the volume of two loudspeakers playing monaural sound in close proximity to each other is 2 squared, or 4 times the sound of a single loudspeaker. It is also why the intensity of laser light grows as the square of the number of photons in the beam. This is a universal principle of wave behavior known as constructive interference. The language of the universe, type 2 communication. The above methods, in essence, all rely on the establishment of telepathic communications with sentient beings. While this is entirely possible in a panpsychism-based cosmology, there are likely a wide variety of other means for communicating with beings who have manifested on or near Earth. Certain energetic forces appear to behave consistently throughout our known universe and thus could be leveraged to develop a language of the universe. This includes mathematics and sacred geometry, harmonics and resonant frequencies, light waves, and electromagnetism. So to wrap up this discussion, I'd again emphasize that we already have a number of technologies that can help to facilitate interspecies communication with transdimensional beings and extraterrestrial biological entities. Additionally, as our scientific paradigm shifts to a consciousness-based paradigm from a mechanistic paradigm, I expect researchers and engineers will discover all kinds of new means for developing languages with these entities. I can understand how this can seem like a silly or trivial exercise, but I insist it is of the utmost importance. I believe that the day is fast approaching when human society will be forced to acknowledge that these beings of higher intelligence do exist and have always existed. When that day comes, we need to have the tools to establish diplomatic relations. Otherwise, we'll have only one tool in our toolbox for interacting with these beings: war and violence. As they say, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Let's not forget, last year the US Space Force spent $15.4 billion to develop space-based weapons and programs. It's approximately $15.4 billion more than the US Foreign Service spent developing a diplomatic corps for our inevitable interaction with extraterrestrials. It's probably safe to assume that this gap in government preparedness is only going to increase over the coming years, so it's incumbent on we the people to prepare for peaceful interactions with non-human beings ourselves.